Hello, I'm Jack Brewer with Expanding Frontiers Research. Welcome to part 2 of FOIA the FBI. In our first video, we gave some pointers on how to compose and submit FOIA requests to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We also gave a specific example of a request we were submitting that viewers could follow along in real time as we got correspondence from the FBI about the request. This video is in a collection titled FOIA Instruction, and you'll find links in the video description to useful resources. Now, in this first video, the subject of our request to the FBI was Jasper Martell Byrd, a former 27-year FBI veteran and also an influential member of the Mormon Church. The executive director of Expanding Frontiers Research, Erica Lutz, and I often collaborate on subjects of our requests and resulting articles and videos. Erica made me aware of the late Mr. Byrd, and we thought that given his lines of work, he would be an interesting subject of a request. He ran missionaries for the Mormon Church internationally as well as in California, and given his history as a 27-year special agent of the FBI, we thought that some interesting material might result. We haven't received any records yet, but we received an email from the FBI on March 4th. But first, let's quickly review how we composed the request. The basis of our request is here in this paragraph. Given that Mr. Byrd was a longtime employee with the FBI, it seemed reasonable to think there would be an inordinate number of responsive records. Therefore, at least for starters, we somewhat limited what we were looking for and what we were requesting the FBI conduct a search on. As you can see in this final sentence here, we pointed out that they may omit from their search memos, references in interagency literature, and similar material other than personnel records and memos to or from Director Hoover. We were interested in Mr. Byrd's personnel records, as well as any memos that he may be exchanging with Director Hoover, or that he may be directly referenced in with other agents to or from Director Hoover. So that's the kind of thing we were looking for. Here is the letter we received March 4th from the FBI. It points out that they located approximately 273 pages of potentially responsive material. They also give us their current guidelines for how long the different amounts of material, the number of pages take to complete processing. 0 to 50 pages is approximately 8 months currently. Our request as it currently stands would be the medium track, which is an approximate time of 44 months to complete. They recommend, or at least give us the option to reduce the scope of the request, which is something that we have been in the habit of doing in the past. And the FBI also helpfully points out that if we choose to narrow the scope of the request, we can request the remaining material in a new Freedom of Information and Privacy Act request in the future. So one of the things we've done in the past is reduce the scope to 50 pages, usually the first 50 pages, to get a preview of the request, to kind of get a sneak peek in a relatively shorter amount of time, and then to decide what to do from there. There are a couple relatively unique things about these circumstances, though, given the changes at the FBI, the what we're presuming are staff depletions, less staff. So we composed a response to this that did a couple of things that I haven't typically been doing in the past that you might find helpful to know about. Here is a response composed and sent the same day back to the FBI negotiation team. I thank them for their email. I reference the FOIA request again. I informed them I'd indeed like to limit the scope of the request, but I'd like to clarify a couple of points to make sure we're all on the same page and not causing the FBI FOIA officers any more work than necessary. I point out that I'm aware the subject of the request, Mr. Byrd, was a 27-year FBI veteran, so I anticipated an inordinate number of responsive documents. I think 273 pages actually sounds about right for the specific types of records that I requested. But just to be sure, I remind the FOIA officer of the original request, just to make sure that in communication and possibly turning some cases over to newer officers or other personnel, that no information's getting lost in the shuffle. And for their convenience, I point out that we did limit the types of records we were looking for, personnel records and memos to or from Director Hoover that referenced Mr. Byrd or were exchanged with Mr. Byrd. A second point that I wanted to reiterate was that I requested a fee waiver, and I wanted to make sure they are aware of that, as their email did mention that fees might be applicable in the future. So I wanted to make sure that we were on the same page about that. You can see the languaging that I used in the FOIA request that I've learned from sources like the FOIA wiki of how to word that. And last but certainly not least, I did advise that I did want to limit the request to 50 pages. I tried something a little different though. I asked for the final 50 responsive pages of the 273. I did that because in this circumstance, we already know that Mr. Byrd did in fact work for the FBI. So we've got a pretty good idea that the first 50 pages would be pertaining to his employment and background checks and things like that. So I thought, let's see what happened last. Let's take a look at the final 50 pages and then take a look at those and see what we might want to request from there. And FBI promptly responded March 5th, thanking us for our email. They pointed out they were limited in what they could discuss concerning the content, since the potentially responsive material has not yet been reviewed by a FOIA analyst. I think our point was nonetheless made, however, and I think that the message got across that we were only looking for a specific type of records. So I think that that was made clear, and that the FBI knows that they did not have to process all responsive material on Mr. Byrd. And we certainly got our point across about the request for a fee waiver, as they are pointing out in their March 5th email that there would be no charge for this FOIA request. So they request then that we advise and clarify if we want it reduced to the final 50 pages. So we did, in fact, then inform them that yes, that was correct. We wanted to reduce the scope of the request to the final 50 pages. That will put us in the 8-month approximately track to get those records. Then we can go from there. And even if we do end up in the longer track, we'll at least be under 250 pages now, as 273 minus 50 will put us in a smaller track for the future if we request all of those records going forward. So if you're viewing this on YouTube, check the links in the video description to take you to more useful resources. And if you're viewing this from the Patreon collection, FOIA Instruction, you can find everything up to date in the Byrd file that we have so far. So thank you. I hope you continue to follow along. We'll share these records as soon as we receive them, and we can look at them together and analyze what we make of them. Thank you from Expanding Frontiers Research.